Among the quiet streets of Rose, a small town in upstate New York, stands an old, nearly forgotten church that few would notice while passing by. Its boarded-up doors, moss-covered walls, and shattered windows were clear signs that no one had crossed its threshold for decades. The locals rarely spoke of the church, and when they did, it was in hushed tones, as if they feared awakening something hidden within its old walls. For me, this place became something of a mysterious challenge. I wasn't a local, but I had family in Rose, and each visit here felt like a step back in time. The town seemed stuck in the past, and something about it always urged me to explore its hidden corners. This time my attention was drawn to the old church. I knew that many avoided it, but for me it was another opportunity to satisfy my curiosity. When I approached the church's massive doors, they looked as though they hadn't been touched by human hands in decades. But I wasn't about to back down. With effort, I pried off the nails and opened one of the doors, and the air around me instantly grew colder. A slight shiver ran through me. But my desire to discover what lay inside was stronger. Through the cracks in the ceiling, faint rays of sunlight streamed in, illuminating the dusty air, giving the room a ghostly appearance. As I stepped inside, I froze for a moment. The sight before me was shocking. The church, once a place of light and hope, had turned into a dark desert filled with an atmosphere of abandonment and fear. The pews were covered in thick moss and mold, their wooden frames rotted and collapsing under their own weight. 12 rows stretched to the back of the hall, seemingly leading me deeper into this forgotten world. In the center of the room lay a huge bell that had fallen from the bell tower. Its metal was rusted, and the wood it was attached to had turned to dust. The bell seemed to have torn the space apart, leaving chaos and destruction in its wake. I slowly made my way forward, feeling every step echo through the church's vast emptiness. Beneath my feet crunched debris and fragments of old Bibles scattered across the floor. Some pages were covered in mold, others soaked with water that had flooded part of the room near the ancient organ. The water was dark and viscous, its surface barely rippling, as if stirred by the breath of an unseen creature. The notes that once filled this building had vanished, leaving only an indescribable sense of emptiness. I moved slowly, pausing at every detail to better understand what had happened here. As I walked around the enormous bell, I noticed something strange. Behind the pulpit stood a huge statue of Jesus. Usually such statues inspire peace, but here it was something entirely different. The statue was covered in blood. At first glance, the blood seemed to be only on the fingertips, but as I got closer, I saw it was seeping from the hands as if from fresh wounds. The blood trickled down the stone fingers, dripping onto the floor and trailing toward the nearby confessional. A cold sweat ran down my back. Something was terribly wrong here. Summoning all my courage, I made my way to the confessional, following the bloody trail. The blood had already dried on the wooden handle, and as I pulled it, I had to exert force for the door to budge. What I saw inside surpassed all my fears. 3 naked bodies lay in the confessional. They were dead, but they didn't look like ordinary corpses. Their skin was intact, but they were empty. There was nothing inside them. It was as if something had eaten everything inside, leaving only the shell. Their eyes were wide open, but their gaze was vacant, as if they had witnessed something indescribably terrifying in their final moments. I stood paralyzed, unable to believe what was happening. My head spun, and my heart beat so fast it felt like it would burst out of my chest. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to obey. I was frozen, as if hypnotized by this horrifying sight. And then, I felt it. A cold, sticky touch on my shoulder. It was a hand. I hadn't even noticed someone approaching me from behind. The cold seeped into my bones, and I realized I wasn't alone in this abandoned church. Slowly, with genuine horror, I turned around. My heart pounded so hard it echoed in my ears. Behind me stood a figure, if it could even be called that. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, with blue veins webbing across its hands and face like a spider's web. Its eyes were too empty, black voids that seemed to devour the light. It stared at me silently, unblinking, and its lips trembled as if trying to speak but unable to. My mind refused to process what was happening, but I understood one thing: this creature did not come with good intentions. My first thought was to run. But as if by command, my legs buckled, and I collapsed to my knees, unable even to turn toward the door. The figure leaned closer, its silent gaze burning through me, and I felt the cold seeping into every cell of my body. Suddenly, a strange sound echoed through the church, like someone striking the keys of the old organ. I glanced toward the source of the sound and saw that the organ, which seemed long dead, had come to life. Its keys pressed down on their own, producing eerie, distorted sounds, the room filled with a melody that was both ancient and utterly unfamiliar. I struggled to break free from the icy grip of fear and crawled toward the exit, never taking my eyes off the figure. But as soon as I moved, the organ roared louder, and the shadows that filled the church began to thicken. The darkness seemed to come alive, writhing around me, draining the last of my strength. The figure emitted a quiet but sinister sound, like a whisper. It stepped back, giving me a moment to flee. Gathering the last of my strength, I rose to my feet, and stumbling, rushed toward the door. The world around me blurred, and the only thing I could see was the faint light streaming through the open door. When I finally burst outside, I collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. Looking back, I saw the church door slowly closing, as if some mysterious force had decided to spare my life. For now. I got up, staggering, and walked away from that place. My thoughts were chaotic, but one thing was certain: the church harbored an ancient evil. A sense of doom clung to me, as if something was following me, invisible but relentless.